Imagine you are standing in a river valley 1,000 years ago. You know the signs, and you know a flash flood is coming. You built your life here because the Mississippi floodplain is the most fertile real estate on the continent. Every flood that recedes leaves behind a fresh layer of silt, free fertilizer that grows massive crops of corn. But the same water that feeds your people can also instantly drown the harvest. Losing a season's crop is painful, but survivable. The real death sentence is in loose seed stock, the corn you set aside to plant next spring. If the river takes that, it takes the future. Yet, right in the middle of this deadly basin, people built a metropolis. Around 1050 CE, Cahokia became the largest city in North America north of Mexico. At its center stood Monks Mound, a 100-foot earthen mound containing roughly 22 million cubic feet of dirt, piled entirely by hand, basket by basket. Tens of thousands of people knowingly planted a sprawling city in a flood zone. They bet their survival on staying above the water. Archaeology textbooks look at these earthen mounds and correctly classify them as stages for chiefs, foundations for temples, and tombs for the honored dead. But looking at the geography forces a strictly utilitarian question. Could these massive monuments have a second purpose as literal life rafts? When your society's greatest threat is the river, a sacred high place and a survival technology do not have to be mutually exclusive. We have to be honest about the physical math. A typical mound summit was maybe an acre or two. You simply cannot fit 15,000 people on top of that during a multi-day flood crest. We also know these people feared human enemies. Cahokia eventually built a 2-mile wooden palisade with guard bastions. You don't shoot arrows at a river. And if we look at older woodland earthworks like Serpent Mound in Ohio, they are built strictly for the dead and for cosmology. They offer zero flood utility. If the platform mound was a life raft, it was never an ark for the entire population. It was a life raft for the engine of the society. It was designed to keep the stored food, the seed stock, and the leadership high and dry, ensuring the culture could replant and rebuild after water receded. Keeping that engine dry requires a structure that won't wash away. By every rule of physics, a 100-foot mound of hand-piled mud on a wet floodplain should dissolve into a landslide during a severe southern thunderstorm. Geoarchaeologists found highly advanced soil engineering. Waterproof clay veneers shed the rain. Inside, alternating sand and clay balanced internal pore pressure so the mound wouldn't rupture. Along the edges, deep-rooted sod blocks retained steep slopes, exactly like modern sandbags. These earthworks stood intact for 1,000 years. They only started slumping in the 20th century, after modern infrastructure drained the floodplain's groundwater and broke the ancient internal water balance. A people who master soil mechanics to this degree have the exact capability and the intent to construct permanent, flood-proof high ground. This sediment core from a lakebed next to Cahokia records 2,000 years of massive Mississippi River floods. Prior to 600 CE, the river routinely breached its banks, leaving repetitive layers of flood clay. Then, an anomaly. For 600 years, big floods essentially vanished. This quiet water window perfectly matches Cahokia's timeline. It is the exact moment population exploded, and massive corn agriculture took over the American bottom. The builders deliberately expanded into the danger zone because they could read the climate. The river gave them a multi-century window of mercy, and they took it. Around 1200 CE, the sediment cores capture a tragic shift. The massive floods returned. The agricultural system was built for a calmer river. As the climate shifted back, Cahokia unraveled, and by 1400 CE, it was completely abandoned. When 19th century Americans encountered the surviving mounds, they invented a fiction. They claimed a lost superior white race built them. That myth did heavy political work. It made it easier to justify forcibly removing Native Americans from this exact same land. It took until 1894 for an extensive Smithsonian survey to exhaustively debunk that story. They proved the earthworks were raised by the direct ancestors of living Native American nations. A false history excused a historical theft. But the physical evidence in the dirt ultimately restored the true architectural legacy of the builders. These engineered life rafts couldn't defeat a permanent climate shift. But they successfully protected a society's engine through centuries of seasonal water. It brings us back to that very first question. When the river comes to take everything, how do you save your people's future? These surviving earthen mountains are the answer. They are a 5,000-year-old monument to the human instinct to lift what we love above the rising water.